Tom Sesluski, who will be answering any questions that you pop in chat. So again, welcome everybody. I am going to make a preface though before we get started. I apologize if you hear dogs barking. It is harvest season and I live on a farm, so there's a lot of equipment going by which causes my dogs to bark. So I do apologize for that up front if you hear them barking. So again, welcome. I hope you find this interesting. I hope you get value out of it. So we're going to jump right into cloud security, talking about Defender for Cloud and some other aspects of security in the cloud environment. So with that said, let's jump right into it. So challenges, security challenges, we all face them. Why? A lot of it has to do with visibility. We have changing workloads, right? We're constantly changing our workloads in the cloud. But what causes some of those security concerns? A lot of it comes down to misconfigurations, right? Or we don't put into place the configurations that we should. But a lot of it comes down to visibility. Really, it's about control. So when we think about some of the security challenges that we all face in today's environments, is about the challenge of making sure that we have everything that we need, all the controls in place. But how do we know that, right? So part of that is looking at what causes those breaches, right? A lot of it comes down to misconfiguration. I missed a patch. I did all of that, right? That's about visibility. How do I know that, right? So without controls in place, approximately 68% of breaches can take months or longer to discover. So before I came to Talon, just as an example, I actually had a customer. I was doing some security work and they did not have their McAfee antivirus feeding into their SIM. They actually had no visibility into that console at all. It was run by a third party. While creating content in their SIM in Sentinel, we actually noticed an alert for malware. And it's basically that it was traversing the network and they were doing lateral movement. So then we have to do all the forensics. We have to trace it all back. We have to do it. Long story short, it had been on the network for months before it was seen somewhere that they did have visibility into. So that's a big part of what's going on is visibility, right? I need to be able to see what's going on and I need to be able to react to that situation. Hopefully everything is in a proactive state where it can react on its own. In 2019, there was actually a 95% increase in the cost of a breach. It went up to roughly $5.16 million. Now, obviously, that's an average, right? And that's across small, medium, and large enterprise environments. And that's according to Ponemon Institute. So I don't know about you. I don't have $5.16 million to spend because I got breached, right? So it's all about understanding what those challenges are and how do we address them. Now, the last point of that is over the years, we have noticed a huge increase in the sophistication of attacks. Okay. With that, kind of laughable the last year because in the last year, there's been a significant increase in the number of DDoS attacks being used as ransomware. They're actually embedding in the packets, hey, pay us and we'll quit. Distributed denial of service has been around forever. It's one of the oldest attacks there is. So Yeah, I've looked at sophisticated malware, ransomware, all of that, seen all the code. Yeah, it's pretty complex, it's pretty sophisticated, but DDoS isn't. But in 2019, there were 12 billion cloud activities inspected, monitored, and controlled by Microsoft products. Okay, that's a lot of incidents that are happening. That's a lot of traffic that's being monitored. But again, it's about visibility. I can monitor everything I want, but if I don't see it, what good does it do me? So let's talk about the new way of securing, right? Zero trust. I'm sure all of you have heard or at least seen something about zero trust. So why are we having a conversation when we're talking about Defender for Cloud? Simple. Because our methodology for securing environments has to change with the way the environments are being built. Zero trust is really a more effective way to secure an environment than the old defense in depth methodology alone. I'm not saying defense in depth is actually an invalid methodology. I'm just saying, how do we use it? How do we make it work for the ever-changing computing landscape that we're working in? IT security is complex. There's none of us who would dispute that. We have many devices, users, different connections. The workforce is more mobile than ever, right? COVID really brought that out. With COVID-19, everybody, for the most part, tried to switch to a mobile workforce to keep everybody safe, right? But traditionally, we all sat behind a firewall here in cubicles, offices, whatever, and we always kind of accepted lower security standards inside the network than we did if you were coming outside the network. Well, that defense in depth methodology really is an old militaristic term. Okay. It means layering defenses until you get to the central operating, the core of the network, right? But back then, most attacks were really network based. They relied on destination IPs, source IPs, protocols, port number, you name it. It was really traditionally network based. We've come a long way since then. It's not network based. What is it everybody wants nowadays? Identity has become the new border. So that's really where zero trust starts playing in. How do I secure this architecture with a zero trust mentality? Now, I can still use defense in depth as part of that strategy. Okay. But security, back in the old days, so to speak, I mean, I remember when a firewall really was a router ACL before there were really true firewalls. I remember tools that could walk over those firewalls, right? There was one tool called Firewalk. If I could predict the next metric hop behind that firewall, I could just jump over it. Again, it seemed simple, it seemed economical, but we always accepted lower security back here. Hey, you're on the trusted side of the network, right? So nothing bad can happen. Okay, so this person goes out to the internet. Now they're hit by a flyby, drive-by, whatever you want to call it, on their web browser. And now they're compromised. But again, we have to start thinking about all of that and how do we secure that? How do we develop beyond that defense in depth methodology? Again, a lot of it now comes down to assets increasingly leave the network, right? I mean, yeah, in the old days, we had sales reps that would go to internet cafes and stuff like that, but it's much bigger than it used to be. Assets leave. We have bring your own device. We have mobile. We have SaaS, right? And again, the attackers have shifted their methodology. to looking for identities. It makes it much easier to do bad things if I already have an identity. And then I can escalate those privileges throughout my lateral movement. So if you haven't noticed, in the last 5 years, there's been at least a 500% increase in phishing emails to try and steal credentials. Last year, there was a big thing about some banking app on the app portal for your phone that had malware in it that they would steal your credentials. Nothing's really safe anymore, right? And we as security people are really overwhelmed with trying to get those things in place. How do I look at this? How do I identify this? How do I know what this attack is? How do I protect the company against that attack, right? So, I mean, I spent a good majority of my career doing lots of things for the Department of Defense here in the United States and overseas in combat zones and all of that. But when we think about identity, and we think about things leaving the network, and we think about, everything moving to the cloud, how's this really for an eye-opener? When the 82nd Airborne jump out of a plane nowadays, they are instantly connected to the cloud. Can you imagine being able to hack that part of the cloud, right? That puts a lot of lives in danger, right? That identity is important. That access is important. Keeps a lot of people safe, not just information. And this is really why we start thinking about a different methodology for securing based on a zero trust model. The first thing we look at, a strategy to increase security assurances. Again, my apologies for my dogs. But for business assets, data applications, it's everywhere. People access the network from everywhere. Yes, Ron? You can go ahead and type your question.
Pardon me, I accidentally clicked the hand raise button.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me.
No worries. It's okay. But yes, feel free. But again, it's everywhere. Public, untrusted networks. How do we secure those people, right? User access is the number one pillar, so to speak, of zero trust. It's what everybody wants. It's policy-driven architecture for a productivity environment. We want to explicitly validate trust of every access request, right? We want to dynamically address insufficient trust. That's one of the big things. How do we do that? A lot of it comes down to artificial intelligence, security products that we have in place, right? All of that, and making sure they're what? They're configured properly, making sure that we're getting use out of the tools that we have purchased to do these types of things. Again, I go back to security is complex, right? I remember the days literally that we bought 3 of the exact same products as far as what they do. Security through obscurity, right? If they hack one, they won't get through the other because it'll get detected. For instance, antivirus. That's expensive. But we're looking at what will lead us down the road to securing the environment with a better methodology, right? This is not a policy. This is a methodology. We're looking at modernizing our SecOps, pervasive detection and response, right? We've all heard of XDR, right? Extended detection and response, and that's what we want. But we want to do it with the least amount of false positives, or, we don't want to block things that are legit, right? So we all know that blocking a CEO from doing something could be a resume generating event, right? So we have to do our due diligence. But we want to have that deep asset visibility inside and outside the firewall. So how do we obtain that? Well, we start looking at a zero trust model. What are the things that I need to secure? How do I need to secure them, right? And we need rapid remediation with automation and integrated workflows, right? So what happens? I saw X, I did Y and Z, and I didn't have to touch the keyboard because I already knew, let's say it was ransomware or it was a bad actor. I already knew that because I have threat feeds and I have all of this monitoring going on, right? What about my operational technology and the data center? How do I monitor that, right? And segment the assets by business risk, right? There's obviously going to be work for me to do there, right? But it's about that workload, that app, that API, device security, right? What about my operational technology? The Internet of Things type technology. And most people don't even realize that when it comes to operational technology, think about your routers and switches. Think about how old that technology is. We're talking 50 years old. The appliances may be brand new, but the technology for a router and a switch, 52, at least 50 years old. And it's really traditionally network based. It's not really that capable of doing identity controls the way we want them done. That's old technology. So how do we secure that? We're looking at securing, increasing that posture, right? Increasing productivity with the least amount of security vulnerabilities. So looking at building that foundation of trust. Again, zero trust is a security architecture model that really institutes a deny until verified approach for access to any resource inside and outside the firewall. It really addresses the challenges associated with shifting that methodology from securing the perimeter to a cloud-centric mobile workforce type environment. Really, the core principle of zero trust is maintaining strict access control. It's a concept that is critical to preventing attackers from actually pivoting laterally and elevating access within an environment, right? It's how we start looking at all of this. Now, this year, this is how important it is. This year, the federal government said that they were going to be compliant by the end of 2024 with a zero trust strategy. Okay. Now, I don't know if any of the rest of you have ever done work in the federal government space, but to do something in a 2-year, 2.5-year time frame for the federal government is extremely fast. They don't do anything fast, right? There's all sorts of procedures they have to go through. They have to get validation, do all of this testing, all of those things. So they've really accelerated themselves here. Now, zero trust actually focuses on 3 guiding principles. Verify explicitly. So always authenticate and authorize on all data points available. So if I'm using username, password, multi-factor authentication, all of those 3 things have to match exactly what they're supposed to match. And I can deny if they don't, right? But I'm really denying until all those things are matched. We use least privileged access. So we want to limit a user with just in time and just enough access. So they only get the access when they need it, and they only get as much as they actually need. So I might be a domain administrator. I could do whatever I want, but I could put things in place that limit the ability to do that. I could use PIM. I could use other controls, right, to limit that. I could make it go through an approval process before I escalate my privileges. All of those things can happen. And then assume breach. You always want to assume breach. Minimize that blast radius, right? What do they have access to? How could they do lateral movement? We want to prevent all of that by segmenting the users, the network, the devices, apps, all of those things, right? I always tell everybody the simplest way I know to define the principle of assumed breach, always assume it's breached, right? Is if I buy a new laptop, the first thing I do, I put an OS disk in and I rebuild the OS to exactly what I want. I format the drive, a low-level format, because I don't know who built it. I don't know what they put on the machine. You know, I, I'm an old guy. My oldest boy used to love a show called Pinky and the Brain. What are we going to do today? Same thing we do every day. Try to take over the world, right? And that's what I operate on. It's not really paranoia if somebody's really following me. And those are the things, it sounds paranoid, but that's what I get paid to do. I get paid to be paranoid as a security person, right? Again, these are principles that we work across different pillars, such as identity, devices, network, all of that, to try and control the environment with a zero trust methodology. Now, cool thing is, if we look at Microsoft products, this really is how they map their products to the different pillars. Now, Microsoft defines 6 pillars. If you go out and you look up zero trust, you'll get anything from probably 3 to 10 different pillars to secure. Microsoft breaks it into identity, devices, data, apps, infrastructure, and network. We at Talon also add 1. We say there are 7 pillars. And we say policy is one of the driving factors for securing that environment. So for identity, we have Azure AD. We have identity protection, Defender for identity. For devices, Defender for cloud, Defender for endpoint, Intune, mobile device management, all of those things. For data, Defender for 365, for SQL, which has a built-in vulnerability assessment tool that we'll talk about. We have Defender for app services, Defender for cloud with just-in-time access. For the network, adaptive network hardening, Azure Defender. Okay, so I was talking about how to identify all of the things that are happening. Well, I could send all the logs from all of these things into Sentinel, the Microsoft SIEM solution. And I could see everything there, central, single pane of glass, so that I'm not looking at 6 different consoles, or in this case, probably 3, right? It's all centralized in a single ecosystem, okay? And I can use that ecosystem. Now, I know I've been around a long time in the IT world, in the security world. And it used to be, let's get this product, that product, this product, that product, and let's try to mash them all together. Okay, that seemed like a good idea back then. Let's live on the bleeding edge of technology. But this is a single ecosystem, and they're all going to natively integrate. And that's not such a bad thing. It's about saving time. It's about saving labor, right? Because we all know security is labor intensive. It's really that human interaction, right? How do I make everything work for me the most efficient way possible, and how do I get down that road? Now, when it comes to anything really to do with security, I am a big fan of a maturity model. When it comes to zero trust, where do I start? For the most part, anything you read will not tell you where's the best place to start. They'll just give you the pillars, and it's up to you to figure out what's the most important thing for you. Okay? Do you start with identity? Do you start with devices, network, data? What? What is it you need to start with? Now, at Talon, in a security assessment, I would tell you, let's start with identity because that has become the new border. Let's secure that. And then work methodically along the pillar. Now, how long is it going to take me? From the day my boss says, Mark, you need to do this. Great. I start securing identities. And then there's a fire, and I have to get called away, and I have to spend 3 days doing something else, and then I have to come back to this. How long is that going to take me? A year? 18 months? 2 years to get all of it done? Because I'm constantly getting called away to do other things. But what if my boss said, you know what, Mark, I'm taking all your job duties away. You are now only responsible for this. How long is that going to take me? Right? 6 months? A year, maybe? That's the point. My point here is don't get frustrated. It takes time. It will always take time. It's about building the right policies, building the right architecture, building the right ecosystem, right? And that's what we're looking at here. But don't get frustrated and quit. It's a valid methodology. It's been proven to work. And it will reduce that attack surface in the environment. Okay. So let's talk about the cloud platform. Azure actually is the only cloud platform built by a security vendor. Now, I know a lot of people who would say, yeah, Microsoft's not a security vendor. Actually, they're the largest security vendor you have never heard of as far as being a security vendor. They earn over $10 billion in security revenue every year. Now, I can tell you, for the majority of my career, I was an X guy, Linux, all of that, right? And, didn't have a lot of faith in Microsoft as a security company. That has definitely changed over the years. They have really put a lot of effort. They do a lot of development. They're constantly revamping their products to make them better, which is more than I can say for some, because I actually came from one of the largest security vendors in the world. And they used to develop stuff. They kind of got complacent. Hey, it's good enough. Microsoft's not that way. They don't say it's good enough. They say, okay, what are the customers saying? Let's listen to that. Let's improve that, right? They have more than 400,000 customers, and 90 of the top Fortune 100 companies trust Microsoft security solutions to secure their environment. I was just doing some research today. Microsoft Defender for Endpoint actually topped the Gartner Best Endpoint Security product in 2021. So they're not really a fly-by-night, right? If they're topping the Gartner chart, they're definitely doing something right. They employ over 3,700 security experts, and they spend over $1 billion annually on security. They have committed to spending over $5 billion. I think that actually went up to almost $10 billion over the next 5 years. That's a huge investment. I know some of these people. I used to work with some of these people, and they are security experts. In 2020, 6 billion malware threats were blocked by Defender products. But right here is something I like to point out. Microsoft takes in over 8 trillion signals every 24 hours. These are threat vectors, indicators of compromise, known malware sites, bad actors, all of that. This is their security research arm, and only a true security vendor is going to have a threat research department. The last security vendor that I worked for before coming to Talon, I affectionately refer to these people as propeller heads. I don't want their job. They're reverse engineering malware, doing all that research. No, I don't want that. Tearing apart code's not a fun day for me. Okay? But that's what they do. They look at all of it to determine if it's truly malware, if it's truly bad actor, if it's truly, a malicious site, all of those things. And they investigate it all. But this research arm is truly what you want in a security vendor. The information they pull out then becomes a threat feed that gets fed into their product so that it knows it's a bad place or a bad actor or whatever that is, right? So if you've ever done analysis work, you're familiar with kill chain methodology. Most people are familiar with the Lockheed kill chain methodology, looking for that whole kill chain model. If you've done analysis, you're probably familiar with the pyramid of pain. The cloud is no different. That's still going to have kill chain methodology that you follow, right? So the first thing is exposure. How are those bad actors going to get in? What are they looking for? Insecurely configured apps, vulnerabilities in there, infected admin devices and accounts and all of that. Then they need access. How are they going to get access? To a virtual machine, a web app? They're going to get credentials and log in through phishing or whatever means they have used. Brute force attacks, the Internet of Things devices, all of those things are valid targets. Then what are they going to do? They're going to try to laterally move. Why? Because they're looking for something, anything, right? So they start looking at those web apps, SQL databases, virtual machines. And then finally, they have their actions. What are they looking to do? Do they want to exfiltrate the data, blackmail you, sell it back to you, whatever that might be? Or do they want to destroy the data because they just don't like you or because they just think it's fun? If you follow geopolitical landscape, you'll know a lot of this data loss was happening in the eastern bloc of the world. They were sending out ransomware, then saying, you know what, pay us, we'll give you the key. And the minute they rebooted the box, everything was wiped. They had no intention of releasing the data. And if you don't think those attacks won't find their way to the US and other countries, which they already have, think again. Those tools that get released typically find their way into the wild. Somebody steals it and uses it, modifies it to their needs. It happens all the time. But it's important to understand this kill chain. What are we looking for? The MITRE matrix, right? Everybody's big on the MITRE matrix. Nobody has it memorized that I know of, but we have reference models for that. Now, looking at Defender for Cloud, it's going to help you strengthen the cloud environment. Workload protection, right? We can use it for multi-cloud security posture. It's not limited to just Azure. Azure actually has an agent called Azure Arc. Arc can actually be deployed to on-premises devices, AWS, Google, and it can make it look like that workload lives in Azure. And I can apply all my products, all my policies, everything to that workload. That gives me a consistent policy enforcement, look and feel, all of that for my security infrastructure. I can put it on servers, service layers, IoT devices, native workloads, databases, storage, all of it. And I can manage it from a central point in Defender for Cloud. So when we look at the big picture here, where does Defender for Cloud actually play? So the first thing I mentioned was that security lab. And you can see here, integrated threat intelligence. Well, guess what? Those people I affectionately call propeller heads on all their diligent work, tearing apart code and everything else, they created a threat feed. That threat feed gets fed into the Defender for Cloud products so that they can look for whatever that indicator of compromise is. And it works across storage. It works across app services, Azure VMs, all my containers, my compute resources. But it's also Defender for Cloud is going to look at my firewalls. It's going to look at my advanced threat protection for SQL, network security groups, securing all of that, all from a single location. And as I mentioned, I can do on-prem as well. I could deploy that Azure Arc agent, right? So that I can actually make these resources look as if they exist in the cloud. All right, policy. I mentioned that we at Talon think policy is huge because for a security person, policy is a driving point for me, okay? Policy gives me a starting point. Whether it's organizational or whether it is in Azure, I want to enforce policy. What is it I need to enforce? What has to be happening in the environment? What does my executive staff say needs to be enforced? Azure policy. I can create policy and it'll apply to everything in the cloud. But I want consistent enforcement. So if I use Azure Arc, all those look like they exist in the cloud. They're going to get the Azure policies that I have applied. I just apply it to that group. And now I have consistent policy enforcement. So the look and feel is the same for everything. Now, what does Defender for Cloud do for me? Defender for Cloud is actually a dashboard-driven tool for security posture management and threat protection. It's going to help you strengthen your security posture for cloud resources or the ones that you have in other clouds, hybrid, right? Or the things you had on-prem, all of that. And it's integrated into those Defender plans. It protects those workloads in Azure hybrid, other cloud, as I've mentioned, using Azure Arc. Defender for Cloud actually provides tools needed to harden your resources, track your security posture, and protect them against cyber attacks, streamline your security management. It's going to fill three vital needs in your environment. First of all, it continuously assesses the posture. It identifies and tracks vulnerabilities for all of those systems. So you can say, hey, look, I'm missing a patch here. I need to apply that patch. It's going to help you harden those resources and services. Again, I have Azure policy, but that policy is also in Defender for Cloud. And Defender for Cloud is going to be looking at it. And it's going to say, hey, you're not compliant. with whatever you've applied to it. Not to mention, it's going to give you recommendations to say, you know what, this is open and you should close it. And it's going to help you defend. It's going to detect and resolve threats to resources, workloads, and services. Now, looking at continuous assessment, it actually, with Defender for Cloud, you actually have a built-in vulnerability scanner. It's a lightweight Qualys scanner. Now, if you're familiar with scanners, you know Qualys has been around since, the late 1990s, and it's been in business ever since. So it's not a fly-by-night scanner. It knows what it's doing, right? It's going to help me continuously assess also by giving me a secure score. I can see how I stack up. The higher the score, the better. I continually strive for that score, right? Less risk to my environment. How does it help me secure the environment? As I mentioned, security recommendations, customize and prioritize hardening tasks for you to improve your posture. You look at the recommendations and you're going to say, ooh, hey, I need to fix that. And in many cases, you're going to have what's called a quick fix button. You don't even have to know what you're doing. Just hit the button and say, fix it for me. Now, I wouldn't do that without reading what it's going to do. How is it going to affect the system I'm applying that fix to, right? There might be a reason it's not fixed. Nothing happens in a vacuum. I would probably go talk to the person who owns that system and say, hey, I'm getting this thing in Defender for Cloud that says you need to do X, Y, and Z. And they say, oh, yeah, don't do that. You'll break the app that's running on it. Oh, okay. So I know not to do that. But you could do it and break the app, right? Just with a click of a button. It also is going to defend. It has enhanced security features that we can enable to detect threats across your resources and your workloads. These alerts are going to appear in the dashboard for Defender for Cloud. You can also send all of those alerts into a SIM/SOAR IT management solution. So I can spool off the logs and send them to Sentinel. So I don't even have to look at this console for alerts. I could have all sorts of automation set up in my SIM that says, if you see this, do this, right? And create playbooks. Looking at the dashboard, you can see there are multiple different panes. As I mentioned, we get a secure score. So you can see right now all the different things that are happening. It's showing me I've got 4,101 resources that are unhealthy. I probably want to address that, right? But I'm looking at my secure score. I'm doing pretty good. I'm in the 50s, right? But you can see the number of subscriptions that we're looking at. Hey, look, I've got 4 AWS accounts because I used Azure Arc and I pulled it over so I could see those. I have Google, 4 projects in Google. How many assessed resources? Oh, so we got 5,984 assessed resources and 4,100 of those are not healthy. Look at all the active recommendations, all the security alerts, but you can see workload, regulatory. So in regulatory compliance, we have the CMMC policy, the NIST, and the ISO policy all applied to this environment. And we can see what we need to do to become compliant. We get insights, most prevalent recommendations, right? So firewall, looking at my Azure firewalls and the partner firewalls that integrate with this. My inventory, seeing everything that I have. Purview, information protection with Purview. Purview is an add-on, but it will help me discover things across my entire architecture. So I can see the controls, all of that from a single pane of glass in Defender for Cloud. It's all about that security posture management when you're thinking about secure score. We want that score to go up. Will it fluctuate? Yes. Why? Because computing isn't static, but we want this score to continually go up. We want it to be as high as possible. We're going to be able to gain insight into the security state of the cloud and all the resources that we see and protect with Defender for Cloud. Now, we can have Defender for Cloud posture type management so we can see secure score and some of those other things for free. But it's about protecting those resources. It's about seeing everything. It's about addressing those vulnerabilities with prioritized recommendations. It's about improving the score, speeding up regulatory compliance. So you saw back here, they had 3 policies applied. If you have not played with policy in Azure or any piece of cloud, I would highly recommend that you only apply 1 policy at a time and fix the policy to near perfect before applying another one. Why? Because what we all have a tendency to do is say, oh, I need to fix this. Then I need to go here and fix this. Then I need to go here and fix this. Instead of working one at a time. Okay? Because you'll find that many of these policies may have a different heading. They fix the same thing when you fix it. And then you have to go through that cycle again every 24 hours of it letting, evaluating those policies before you realize you just went down a rabbit hole you didn't need to go down. Okay. But again, it's evaluating everything here. It's looking at that score. The impact it has is what we're looking at. Now, again, my secure score. I've got all these little panels that I can go through, but this secure score is going to help me understand the posture of my environment. So here I'm at 47%, right? You can see the subscriptions that are the highest here. I can look and see what the posture is of all of these. I can look at what it wants me to do by clicking View Recommendations, right? So I can see my score for each of my subscriptions and view the recommendations and then go fix them or create an exemption for it. What is it we need to do? But you can see it tells me which one's doing the best, right? I come in here, I look at the recommendations, and you can see these are all categorized. Remediate vulnerabilities, enable encryption at rest. And it shows me what the health is. How many resources are healthy and unhealthy? What is my potential impact to my score? So if I come in here and I click remediate vulnerabilities and I open it up, I can potentially, by fixing 3 systems, gain 10 points on my secure score. That's a lot of points. That's going to put my architecture in a better state. And this, when it comes to vulnerabilities, might be as simple as I need to reboot the box. Because a lot of these vulnerabilities don't get solved unless you reboot the box, right? It's a patch. You need a reboot. Could be that simple. Or you may have forgotten a patch. Or something's offline and it didn't get patched. But we need to address those recommendations. Compliance, right? So again, regulatory compliance. We're going to look at compliance. It's benchmarking. Every system, every subscription by default gets what's called an ASC default policy right off the bat. That policy is loosely based on NIST 800 53. And it has Microsoft best practice sprinkles thrown in there for Azure security. That's a great place to start. Secure that policy first. Then, if you've already applied these other policies, give it a couple of days and see how far it remediated these other policies. But I can apply all this compliance across the entire spectrum of what I'm managing, and that includes AWS and Google, so that I have a consistent application of policy, regulatory or not, across the entire landscape. But again, compliance is something most of us have to work towards. At some point, whether it's HIPAA, whether it's PCI, any of that, we have some compliance standard that we're working towards. Maybe it is just best practice. Maybe it's a specific thing that we create a custom policy for, and we can create custom initiatives. But again, we're looking at becoming compliant. And this dashboard shows me how well I'm doing on that compliance. Or I could go to Azure Policy and look at it and walk one by one through it, right? Again, I can drill into what I'm not compliant with. So you can see here, managed identity should be used in your web app. So I've got 4 web apps that I haven't configured managed identities for. So I know I need to look at those and create a managed identity. But I need to talk to the people who own these apps because I don't want to break those apps. There might be a reason why they're not using a managed identity, right? Then I would need to create an exemption to the policy. These are things that we start looking at because nothing happens in a vacuum. I need to understand what's going on in the environment. And I can't be an expert with everything. I didn't write the app. I'm the security guy. So I need to talk to people and I need to get down that rabbit hole. Now, there are many free policies. There's a few you have to pay for, but out of the box, you're going to find things like NIST, CMMC, you're going to find PCI, all of these, HIPAA, all of these policies that you can apply to your environment. And as I mentioned, the Azure Security Benchmark by default is applied to every subscription in Azure. That's the guiding principle of pieces of NIST and Azure Security Best Practice. I always tell people, start with this policy first, because you will find, even though it has a different subcategory or sub-policy name, such as full-blown NIST, if I apply it, has many different categories that I've actually done security assessments along with Tom. We have seen where NIST has 6 different findings for 6 different subcategories, but when you get to the individual policies, they're all exactly the same. Fix this. Turn on logging for your storage accounts. But yet there were 6 findings here with different categories. I only have to fix it once and then let it do a reassessment of the environment over a 24-hour period, and they all go away. And it's no longer a finding. So start here. I really recommend you start here before applying another policy, and get as good with this policy as you can be before applying another one. You might have to apply new exemptions for this if you have to exclude something, but at least you'll have remediated based on Azure best practices. Policy is important. Now, looking at Defender for Cloud Firewall Manager. So if you have Azure firewalls, obviously you're going to see all of this here. But there are partner firewalls, that do integrate with this, such as I believe Palo Alto's one. Not all firewalls are going to be shown in here, okay? But specific partner firewalls will show up in here so you can see how those bench out. And it's going to show you how all your subnets, all your hubs, all of that are configured. So you can see here, there are all these ones that are protected by Azure Firewall, protected by a partner firewall. No firewall detected on any of these virtual hubs. Looking at all my protected VNets and unprotected VNets. Looking at DOS protection, DDoS protection. Now, in case you didn't know this, I'll explain that here. Everybody gets DDoS protection out of the box with Azure, but it is fabric level, Microsoft Fabric. It is not specific to your environment. If you want it specific to your environment, then you would need to get standard DDoS protection. And I will comment that this is not a fly-by-night product. It is very good at what it does. Earlier this year, Microsoft's standard DDoS protection protected the largest DDoS attack in history. It was 3.2 terabit. I know people who talk about firewalls. Well, we got this firewall and it protects us with DDoS. There's no firewall in the world that I have ever come across that benchmarks at 3.2 terabit. None. And I've worked on some of the fastest firewalls in the world. I don't know of any firewall that can protect against a 3.2 terabit DDoS attack. So this is a proven product, something to think about, especially if you're a larger enterprise. Protect your specific tenant. Looking at inventory, this gives me improved visibility across the entire estate, right? This is all about looking at all my resources in a single view. Everything that's monitored, whether it's in Google, whether it's in Azure, whether it's in AWS. It's easy filtering. I can look at it through Azure Resource Graph. I can export it to CSVs so I can slice and dice it any way I want. It's how I can manage my resources. You know, I can see all of this. I can evaluate all of this in a single view, right? So I can see all my resources everywhere from a single view. I think there's a question there.
Yeah, Mark, this is Eric. It was just on the DDoS graphic. Your comment was on the purple that it was basically turned off or not enabled. Is that simply a case of turning it on to enable it, or?
It is. You turn it on and it's a cost of $29.44 a month.
Okay.
See, this is where they've
Elected to turn it on and.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. You'd have to turn on the standard protection. Again, as mentioned, it's everybody gets the fabric, but the protect your environment only, right? Specific to you is actually something that you have to turn on. And you have to pay for, obviously. Make more sense, Eric?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
You bet. Okay. So again, I can see my inventory in a single view. I can see all my resources, all of those things from a single view. I can see how they stack up. I can manage all of them. I can export it. Again, all of those different things that I'd want to be able to do from a dashboard. Now, when it comes to the inventory, Defender for Cloud actually periodically analyzes the security state of your resources to identify potential security vulnerabilities, okay? It then gives you a recommendation on how to remediate that, okay? So when any resource has an outstanding recommendation, they're going to appear in that inventory. So I'll get my total resources connected to the security center. I get my unhealthy resources with those active security recommendations. I get my unmonitored. These are the ones with agent monitoring issues. They have the log analytics agent, but the agent isn't sending any data or it has other issues. These unmonitored ones are something that we definitely would want to address as quickly as possible. Because if they're not being monitored, I don't know what's going on with them, right? And that's something that we want to resolve instantly, because those logs are important for that visibility into that architecture. What's going on? How did it get disabled? It was working yesterday, right? Those things, because there's plenty of malware out there that disables a lot of different things. Unregistered subscriptions. So if you haven't registered, you own it, but you didn't register and connect it yet, that's something we'd want to look at as well. Why isn't it registered yet? Is it just not being used? What? But again, those are things that you would have to, as an organization, decide what to do with it. Now, looking at the inventory, you can slice and dice this any way you want. That is something Microsoft is really good with. Tom loves to point this out in any demos we do, is the fact that you can really slice and dice all this data with filters. You can get as granular as you need to get right down to an individual resource if you know what you're looking for. So you can see here, I've got 1,904 resources, 318 unhealthy, none unmonitored, none unregistered, right? And we can see the state. Defender for Cloud is on. The monitoring agent is installed on a couple of them, not all of them, right? But you can see here all these filter options. So I could come here, I can add all these filters. I could say I want non-Azure. I could open a query and run a manual query, right? Type in my own KQL. But you can see here that I can look for a tag. So I can actually, let's go back because it went too fast. But, whoops. So you can see I can filter this and I look for a specific environment production tag. And I'm down to a single, right? I can look at a monitoring agent. I can say, I'm looking for specifics, right? I can change all these filterings to get very granular based on tags, based on all sorts of different things. Now, it's best practice. You should be tagging your resources. All of those things matter. And it's going to help you manage the environment. But you can see these filters will get me granular visibility into specific resources. I mentioned Purview earlier, information protection. Azure Information Protection really is in the maintenance portion. I believe the end of this month is where it goes out of production, right? And it's being replaced by Azure Purview. And Purview is information protection. And we can drill in and we can actually go across all the Defender for Endpoint, all the different places across the cloud and discover all the information. You can see here the location for anything that came from Defender for Endpoint is actually noted as a location type endpoint. It gives me the specific system name. It tells me the ranking, right? It's saying there's a risk here. Labeled files. I see all of the different information types that are being addressed here. So I can discover all of the data that's out there that lives, all these different files that potentially could be risks, right? Are they protected? All of that. I can run this in conjunction with DLP. Now, I mentioned earlier that you have a quick fix button. It's simply designated as a lightning bolt. Again, you'll see this next to a recommendation if a quick fix is available. But even if there isn't a quick fix available, you will get a recommendation that pretty much walks you through step by step of everything you need to do to fix what's wrong based on that recommendation. And that's huge because, again, I'm not an expert with every application, every database type, all of that. I might not know how to fix it. Now, I could certainly talk to somebody and say, can you tell me how I fix this? And they probably could. But wouldn't it be nice to be able to look at something and say, oh, okay, so all I need to do is do this and it'll fix it. This is nicer because then I don't have to know anything. I could just say, fix it for me. But again, nothing happens in a vacuum, right? We want to make sure we understand what it's going to do, what effects it's going to have on the environment before we fix it. Talk to people. Make sure you understand why they did or did not want this to happen. That's huge. There are things that don't need to be fixed if you want to continue to do business, right? You might break something. There might be a valid reason that you need to create an exemption. So you can see here under recommendations, all of these lightning bolts. These are all things that can be fixed with the click of a mouse. Well, actually, it's about 2 or 3 clicks of a mouse. But you can see vulnerability assessment should be enabled on your SQL Server. That vulnerability assessment on your SQL Server is simply a matter of going into the settings for Defender for Cloud and turning on the scanner. That's it. And that's what this button will do. So that it can scan to see if there are any vulnerabilities on that device. Again, you may have some other scanner in your environment doing this. Okay, that's okay too. But this is built in. And if you are using Defender for Cloud to fix or to protect a SQL Server database, why not just turn on the scanner anyway? So you get the information here instead of having to walk through your scanner and figure out how to fix it. It's built in. You're already paying to protect the database with Defender for Cloud. Why not utilize the tool to its fullest capability? I understand you may have some other scanner, Nessus, Rapid7, whatever that might be. But this, if I turn it on, is going to populate this, which is going to help me do what? Improve my secure score. Otherwise, I have to go look at all those third-party scanners that are outside this environment and figure out how to do it. Just saying, utilize what you already paid for if you're using Defender for Cloud. Again, looking at a quick fix. I get a list of all the systems and I can pick and choose which ones I want. Simply click the radio button and then I say fix it. Tells me everything that's wrong, what it's going to do, so I can understand it. But it's a simple, quick fix here. Not something you're really going to get with a third-party product that's not in the cloud, that's not looking at all of this. Yes, it will still be in your scanner. I don't say it won't. But if you wanted to fix it, you have to figure out how to fix it. This is going to tell you how to fix those. Now, multi-cloud. Again, I've mentioned this before. By utilizing Azure Arc, you can actually traverse on-prem and other cloud environments. that Azure Arc agent is actually free to deploy. Based on certain metrics, it may continue not to cause a cost impact. So if you're using Defender for Cloud and you deploy an Azure Arc agent and you want to enforce policy, Defender for Cloud has policy enforcement built into it. So not going to cost you anything because it's already built in, right? But there's no cost for the agent itself. You can deploy that anywhere and everywhere. I can use it on servers, containers, data services, right? So that I have a unified plane of existence for everything that I can manage from a central location. I don't have to pop into Google. I don't have to pop into AWS, and I could bring it all into Azure so that I could have a continuous posture assessment in a central location, which is huge. I now don't have to manage 3 different consoles to see what's going on, to fix what's going on or what isn't going on. Again, it's across the whole entire landscape, whether it's multi-cloud, whether it's hybrid on-prem. We're going to have a secure score, which you don't have if you're not pulling that information into Defender for Cloud. It's going to do threat detection. It's going to use that Qualys scanner to evaluate those systems to say, hey, you know, it's missing a patch, or hey, there's something that you need to do. This isn't secured, right? It's going to help you automate. You can do SIM ingestion, SIM integration with automation at scale. I can export all of this data. Again, if you use Sentinel, it's all in the same ecosystem. It's just a matter of saying continuously export to this workspace. And now it's all in Sentinel. Other than that, it becomes a little more complex depending on the SIM that you've chosen. Again, subscriptions, multi-cloud. You could deploy Defender for Cloud across all your subscriptions. You can deploy it across multi-cloud. You can use the Azure Arc agent to do on-prem, and you can bring it all into this central dashboard so that you truly get, in essence, a single pane of glass to assess the security, compliance, posture of your entire ecosystem. And you can work across it from one console. Hugely valuable tool, right? And as I mentioned before, it's all integrated, right? So we have Defender for 365, Defender for Cloud. This is Microsoft's extended detection and response system, right? I can automate all sorts of things in here, make things happen. But I can also feed it to my SIM, Sentinel, and they all natively integrate. It's a couple of mouse clicks to get it all to come to Sentinel. There's pre-built content in Sentinel to actually generate events and alerts and all of those things with workbooks, automation, all of that you can customize. It will bring in your multi-cloud, especially if you're doing Azure Arc, because then it's all coming from here, right? I can integrate third parties in there. So I could bring my firewall logs in there, stand up a Linux box and spool all of the Ceph and syslog, and then spool it all into Sentinel so that everything truly is in a central logging alerting system. So from an analyst point of view, I only have to look at one console, usually, until I get into a deep dive forensic, and then I'm going to have to start spidering out to the different consoles. But this is going to alert me, and in many cases, I can use it as my SOAR platform and automate responses. so that I don't have to do anything. It's going to go out and automatically do everything for me based on a playbook that I've written. Now, it is comprehensive threat protection. I mentioned this a couple of times. Across any server, any VM, any container, databases. So you can see all of the different databases, SQL, MySQL, Maria, the Internet of Things. Now, one thing I like to point out about Defender for Cloud, you may decide that you're going to use whatever antivirus that you're going to use. You may decide that you're going to use some other tool to monitor something in Azure. I will tell you this, to date, nothing that any of us in the security department at Talon, none of us have found anything that actually protects Key Vault, storage accounts, or the Azure management interface. So think of it this way. You may have a solution that you deploy a network monitoring agent that monitors the logs from your key vaults, your storage accounts, and from the Azure management information. But they do not actively prevent threats. They feed information to a central logging where you have to look at it. So only Defender for Cloud actively prevents threats against your storage accounts, because this is where all your information is stored. You've got all these blob files and all this other stuff in here. It may be encrypted, but people can still steal it. Your Azure Resource Manager. So you decide that you're going to download a template from GitHub to deploy something. It would scan that template to say, I don't think this looks right, and I'm not going to deploy it. I'm going to block it. Nothing I know of currently does that other than Defender for Cloud. And the last point is Key Vault. Key Vault is the keys to your kingdom. All your keys that you store for activity that happens in the cloud. Nothing actively prevents threats that we know of currently against Key Vault other than Defender for Cloud. It's not just simply monitoring the log and sending that log feed somewhere and then you have to figure it out and look at it. It actively prevents threats against that Key Vault, which is what you want. Because if I can get this, I own you. If a bad actor can get keys, they can do whatever they want in your cloud. Just something to think of. Again, huge value there when I can actively prevent rather than reactively going in and trying to do forensics. It's already happened. Hopefully, with that log monitoring agent, you actually catch them before they get in. But who knows? That's a crapshoot, right? Again, you also have workload protection. So I can see all of my current workloads and what's happening with all of those from a central dashboard. So I can defend against threats. So you can see here all the coverage that Defender for Cloud has, right? How many servers, containers, registries, all of that are being protected. This really is huge. And the one thing when it comes to containers, Defender for Cloud actually uses dynamic analysis when it looks at Docker images and all of that. It doesn't do static analysis. So it basically looks at it as a complete image so that it gets a true idea of how this is running. Whereas static analysis is actually going to look at bits and pieces and may not be able to fully understand what's going on. It's going to use AI all of those things that are built in. I see all my security alerts, high, medium, low. I see all my advanced protection, all of those things that are unprotected, right? And those are things that I would want to remediate and make sure that they were protected. But again, central dashboard, it is a dashboard-driven system. So looking at Defender for servers, we want to reduce the open ports, right? So we can utilize network security groups to lock down the behavior, right? What's open at any given time. We can also use just in time. So just in time gets applied to know what those management ports are and when it should open them. So it's controlling that access. Network security groups basically are rules that you put in place so that you're hardening that, right? And it's adaptive. We can block malware with adaptive application controls. So looking at AI, what's supposed to be happening? I know what this app is supposed to be doing. It shouldn't be doing that, and I'm going to block it so that we can prevent that data exfiltration out of the network. Right? It's all about that adaptive control. Again, turning on vulnerability assessment. It is already part of Defender for Cloud. All you have to do is go into the settings and that automation piece in the settings and say, you know what? Turn on deploy log analytics agent by default. Every time there's a new server, it'll automatically get it. And it creates a policy to make sure that happens. Turn on your vulnerability assessment tool. Turn on the Qualys tool. Simply a matter of setting a setting so that it continuously evaluates Linux and Windows boxes for vulnerabilities. Defender for SQL. Looking at anywhere, whether it's in Azure or on-premise or other clouds. It's all about protecting specific advanced threats that target SQL servers. It's all about those vulnerability assessments that you turn on that I just mentioned so that you can fix misconfigurations. Remember, misconfigurations are one of the biggest reasons why environments get exploited. And that is something that we don't want to happen, right? Defender for storage, as I've mentioned, and I harp on this, you can put a log monitoring agent, but that's not preventing anything. That's just sending a log. We want to actively prevent threats against our storage because this is where our blobs, our files, all of these things live. And it will actively prevent threats against your storage, no matter what it contains, whether it's a data lake, whether it's a file share, a blob container, all of that. It will actively prevent that. And it will log those, and you can send that log to your SIM to say, oh, hey, look, it prevented this. Again, container registries. It scans those registries in dynamic analysis so that it can see really everything that the image is trying to do. It's going to scan it at runtime as well to make sure that it's not doing anything nefarious. And it will protect the environment, protect your containers and your registries. It works across Kubernetes, your clusters, real-time threat detection prevention, right? Policy management, all of that. I mean, an attack matrix, if you look at the matrix, it's really no different. I mean, it's just applied to a container. And you can read this. I'm not going to mention everything, but you can see here, it targets a kube config. It's going to use a new container. It's going to try to create cron jobs to be persistent. It's looking at escalating through a host path mount, right? Defense evasion, it's looking at container name similarities, network mappings for discovery, cluster internal network for lateral movement. You know, it could cause a denial of service. All of these things. There's a whole reference article here on how it works. It's about the breadth of protection that it brings. Again, Defender for the resource manager, so that you don't accidentally bring in something you shouldn't. Defender for DNS, so you can see all those nefarious DNS calls. Might help you detect something that wasn't detected. And the key vault I've already harped on. Your inventory, right? Up for IoT. Discover all of that, those assets, looking at managing all those vulnerabilities, detecting threats, integrate with your SIM. Sentinel is Microsoft SIM. Again, it's a platform that can be used for analysis. It can be used to automate through playbooks for your SOAR solution. All of that comes into play. This I will have Gina give you as a reference, but actually, there was an economic study done by Forrester about return on investment for Defender. Now, you've got, net present value, benefits present value, return on investment. That one I understand. I'm not an accountant. And I mean, this money thing really doesn't mean a whole lot to me. I'm a security guy. This is what I focus on. It's going to be 25% reduction in risk of a breach. I'm all about that. 50% reduction in time to threat mitigation, 30% reduction in security policy and compliance management time, and it's going to save my company $216,000 in annual spend. This is what I'm about. I'm not an accountant. These numbers take me forever to figure out. But if you're an accountant, awesome. And Gina posted the article, but in the chat, but this is what I'm about. I want to reduce my workload and I want to save the company money. And that's what I'm about. And that's what Defender for Cloud, again, according to this Forrester study, came away with. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. Again, we do a lot of security assessments and we do it across multitudes. This is our methodology. We do workshops, we deep dive the cloud environment, and we give you solutions. Something, if you haven't had an assessment on your cloud, it is something to think about. Many organizations that Tom and our team and myself have done, things, again, the things you don't know that you don't know. And we've discovered a lot and helped a lot of different companies protect and harden their environments through these assessments. So again, thank you for your time. If there's any questions, comments, please feel free. With that, I'll turn it back over to Gina.